And this is why preparation happens so far in advance of needing it, right? Because you can't, in the middle of an incident, like I hate the saying that's like never waste a crisis. I hate that. No one is building long-term infrastructure during a crisis. They're just trying to put the fire out, right? I need you to be thinking about, again, what are the long-term outcomes that you want to see from this program? Let's build that now so that we can quickly make decisions in the moment and be proud of where we end up.
Well, and when I say don't waste a crisis, what I mean is that, take those learnings and then, use that to, drive your roadmap for the next year.
I worry about the popular use, at least in the security community, where I feel like they've defaulted to managing by crisis. As if we can't get anything done unless we're having a crisis, which I'm like, you should be incentivized to avoid the crisis rather than just allow it to happen because you don't know how else to advocate for your team. I feel like, managing by crisis is not strong management.
Also, I think some of us are in organizations which only really allow us to manage by crisis. And that's maybe a problem at another level of the organization, but that's a real problem.
But especially if you're in an executive position, you either need to, number one, not take jobs where you're not going to be able to succeed, right? Like being able to recognize whether or not you're in that type of organization or about to join it. Or number two, it is in fact your job to change that reality for your team before the crisis, right? If you're working for a security executive who can't get budget until there's a crisis, I have a lot of questions about the competency of that security executive.
True. Yeah. It's either the executive or the organization or some combination of both, and probably some combination of both. But get that motivation happening.
I feel like sometimes, especially like first-time CISOs, especially if they're coming up through the engineering ranks, they may not be prepared or even aware that you're no longer a security person. You are a business executive. You need to be able to form alliances and relationships with your executive peers in order to get things done. For example, I mentioned that we do like training with various engineering teams on negotiating with product teams, with other engineering teams, right? To get shared KPIs and to get security outcomes onto a roadmap outside of your reporting chain. Your CISO or your CSO, whatever the title happens to be, right? Chief Information Security Officer or Chief Security Officer for folks who aren't in security. You need to be able to, you can't isolate yourself from company politics just because it's unpleasant. It's actually how the business works.
It's the job.
And
yes.
Exactly. And I don't think that we've adequately prepared a lot of newly minted security executives for the reality that of this role, right? It's not about being the smartest security person in the room. It's about being an executive who can get shit done.
Interesting. That's an interesting way to frame it. Yeah. I don't know. I'm thinking about this.
Like your chief marketing officer is not always the smartest. It doesn't come up with every single like good marketing idea by themselves, right? Their job is to go win the budget and to make sure that execution delivers on that investment.
They build and run a team to...
It's a business unit. So I think more security teams need to recognize if you want to be treated like a business unit, you need to act like one.
Okay. How are you driving value for the business? What's your ROI? And we talk in security about that being hard to quantify, but like...
But I think that's true if you're only focused on security ROI. If, for example, you look at something like support tickets, a lot of companies track the cost of individual support tickets.
Oh, yeah. Very closely.
They know to the penny how much every ticket costs, right? Well, as a security organization, can we go talk to our customer support team and find out, are they getting a lot of tickets about security issues? Is there something we can do to reduce the number of security tickets they're getting? Is our login process too difficult, right? To get a secure password. Is account recovery too difficult? That's usually the one that kills everybody. Because they've put in all these security things and not considered what like normal people do when they use these tools. So if you work with your customer support team to reduce the number of tickets, look at you delivering value to the business, right? And it had nothing to do with code reviews, right? Same thing with like Cisco actually produces a really good report on privacy benchmarking every year, where their privacy team works with their sales team to find out how many deals did we close because of a privacy thing that we built, right? So they can actually get tangible ROI for, because of our privacy thing, either something that we built or something that we removed, right? We were able to close all these deals, or we were able to shorten the sales cycle, right? So go work with your cross-functional partners, figure out where are you actually interacting with meaningful business transactions. And so it's not like, here's the value of, the vulnerabilities that we found. It's because of our team, we made more money and we spent less on support.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe I don't know. I had a project when I was at Stripe to try to take the like security compliance documentation, just put together a packet so we could, when a customer comes to us with their own bespoke security questionnaire, we could like hand them back the packet, be like, all the answers you need are in here. Yes, please come back to us if you have any questions. Almost no one reads those. I'm fairly certain that I was the only person who ever read some of the ones that we received from our vendors. But like getting to that point, but also maybe maybe that's the thing I could have, sold harder on. I got like halfway through it and then like wound up leaving, but at least, got them started. And but yeah, I don't know, maybe there was also other ROI there that we needed to be more involved in the sales process and like, or figure out where the sales process was getting hung up on security issues, if the sales process was, and where we could help there. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, and it's interesting because I think one function that has done this well is the legal team that deals with contracts, right? So, especially if you have a large vendor, they have very specific requirements for things like data storage and data security and data transfers, right? All of the companies that already have those things in place can sign very large contracts with large customers quickly. Well, quickly, right? But faster than otherwise.
By enterprise software standards, yes. Faster than somebody has to go put all that stuff in place.
Yeah. And so the thing is, like, there are people in your organization who have this knowledge, who have access to these numbers and this data. Like, you just need to go analyze it and put it together and figure out how to create a narrative that is compelling to the business, right? So, yeah, sure. If you go in there with like the Verizon breach report, so like your board meeting, like, of course, no one's going to take you seriously, right? And it's why they're all, we see a lot of board presentations that are focused on things like, how do we compare to our peers, right? Because particularly in the United States, in areas where we lack regulation, companies are hesitant to stick their neck out in areas where their competitors aren't doing that, right? And so a lot of boards are like, how do we compare to our peers and all this other stuff? And they feel like in a lot of cases, that's a placeholder for a metric that they would truly care about, which is, how is security impacting the bottom line?
Well, and to tie it back to the incident, like it sounds like this was an opportunity where, like you said, like security actually delivered kind of a PR win. Like Uber, in a moment where it really needed a win, got one from the security team being able to stand up and say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we did. Here's why.
To be able, I mean, we were able to disclose all of those reports because our team was so thoughtful in the way that they communicated with this individual. We were proud of what we had said. Like, and I mean, like, we deserve to be proud. We weren't just like arrogantly proud, right? But we were proud of the amount of time and attention that we had given to this communication long before we ever expected anyone else would ever see it. Because we just assumed, the same way that, people say, like, if if you don't want to see it on the front page of the New York Times, don't say it, right? That is true. And not necessarily because it's going to show up in the New York Times, but because if it's on Twitter, some people think it's fact, right? And it takes resources to figure out what's even true. And then there's just no way you can rewrite the internet, right? So it's just so much better to try to prevent the, the incidents from occurring and to be able to minimize the damage that they can cause in advance.
Get it right from the get-go as a matter of process and as a matter of policy, rather than having to come in after the fact and do cleanup on, was that something that grew organically as you built it, or was that something where you had to actually take a case to your business leaders like you're discussing and like sell the ROI of disclosure?
So the disclosure piece, I think part of this was a silver lining of all of Uber's PR nightmares, is that we just expected anything could become public, right? Whether through a researcher or, a criminal investigation, like everything was fair game, right? There are so many memes and emojis in my emails because I just expected a judge is going to have to read it out loud and I want it to be hilarious, right? So, we just, by default, we expected to constantly be under the radar, right? To be under the spotlight. And so we couldn't fly under the radar. And when you assume that somebody is always watching you, it does change the way that you behave. Now, if we think about it from a privacy perspective, it sounds creepy. But from a transparency perspective, as a company, it's really important to just, to just be prepared, like communicate and treat people in a way that you're not worried about this becoming public.
Well, also, it sounds like you were able to communicate in a way that, you were, totally willing for this to become public without being defensive, which is, I think, like when I think about the kind of conversations that I have had with, especially legal, is like the classic people who will get cold feet. They're like very aware that, oh yes, all this stuff could become public and we don't want it to become public no matter how good a job you've done. And so,
yeah, I was very lucky that during the time that I was at Uber, we had some of the smartest, most experienced security counsel that I have ever worked with, both in-house and outside counsel, were fabulous. And so that played a lot into it, right? The fact that we had a fully supportive legal team that understood our perspective, that like buried bodies are expensive and stressful. Like, we don't want to have buried bodies sitting around the company, right? And so, like I always tell our clients, I'm like, if you have skeletons in your closet, the best thing you can do is pull them out and teach them how to dance.
Okay.
And do it now.
Okay.
Right? Because just think about like anytime you're trying to like keep a secret, like how many people do you have to trust to keep that secret, right? And there are going to be some company secrets, like intellectual property, that are worth that effort. And then all of the other secrets, why spend money, time, and energy when, trying to keep that a secret, when the reality is if you're just more thoughtful in the way that you communicate. It's interesting to me that, there's so much put into risk management in some of these companies, and, particularly on cybersecurity teams. And I'm like, the words that come out of your mouth demonstrate how well you actually understand the concept of risk management.
It's not just financial risk. It's not even reputational risk the way risk management people understand it. It's like relational risk.
Yeah, well, and even like the risk of a misunderstanding can be incredibly costly, right? Even if you are really trying to do something good, right? Maybe it's not anything malicious, but if you didn't communicate it clearly, now there's a huge misunderstanding and a blow up on the internet that you have to, diffuse. I don't know, could we have spent like 4 more minutes carefully crafting that message so that it was clearer?
So it sounds like some of the work was like having you embedded fairly closely with these engineering teams who were doing bug bounty triage to help them sort of uh, craft the message and craft the relationship, and with that, keep that North Star in mind of like the relationship that you wanted to have with the researchers on an ongoing basis, and just a little support.
Yeah, well, and I think you can really divide the value of my role sitting so closely with those folks in being one, I was a constant reminder of thinking about those long-term outcomes, right? But also I could just be a sounding board for them to go, does this say what I think it says? You know, like how's getting a second opinion of you, because again, if we're thinking about should this become public, it's going to be read by more than just somebody with like technical background, right? How will this read to a journalist? How will this read to a regulator? How would this read to a customer?
We got in the habit of doing that when I was at Akamai, even just sort of on an informal basis, pass the laptop around. I'm going to send this email. Does this look hinky to you? And it made a big difference. Yeah.
I do that. I'm a communications professional and I have people in my life and on my team where I'm saying, can I get a gut check before I hit send on this? Because I need to make sure that it says what I intended to.
And then building processes which support that in the organization, and the organization giving people the time to take that extra 4 minutes rather than, measuring them on how many bug bounty tickets they closed this sprint. And yeah, all those things.
I mean, that's a crazy measurement just in general because fewer tickets isn't necessarily a good thing.